that's really a decision that the community will ultimately need to make. And then we'll have to actually make some additional code changes to make that completely possible.
I mean, I understand and I'm excited about the new features in architecture. I mean, once we can start seeing, is it really just simply I need to manage 2 keys and yes, I moved this key to this server and this key now and I comment them out?
So what does block validation do that's different than block signing? Compute.
So in the new consensus mechanism, there's distinction made between, so in the current consensus mechanism, there's a combination of things, if you will. There is the block production, there's the block validation, and the block finalization for a given block. So now what happens is you produce a block, you sign a block, and you're implicitly validating the block that you're building upon, right? So in the new consensus algorithm, you can validate blocks that you have not built upon. So you can just validate them directly as they come into your node and then communicate that out. So there's a distinction there between that I've validated a block as opposed to that I'm actually producing a block. And we could definitely even discuss, now we're not talking about it in 5.0 immediate release, but we're talking about potentially separating out those two concepts so that if the community is interested, we could have different validators than block producers, or maybe more validators than block producers. You know, they don't have to be the same thing anymore. They can be completely separate. And so you have the separation there of concerns. And so you need different keys for those 2 rows.
But yeah, not in scope for the consensus upgrade, but in the future, we could perhaps again, 21 producers and 50 validators, and they could be the same or a completely different group of operators.
Correct.
So in 5.0, potentially, I know you said it may not make it, would it only be like the V1 version where maybe it is tied to the 21 hard code still?
In 5.0, right, from where we are right now, there's no plan to separate those 2 concepts. I mean, we're separating them in implementation, and so we're preparing for that possibility. But that's really a decision that the community will ultimately need to make, and then we'll have to actually make some additional code changes to make that completely possible. So again, for 5.0 release, it's the same way that it is today, if you will. So a VP will be playing, if you will, multiple roles. They will be both producing, signing, and validating blocks. So that will be the role of the VP. And currently, as we have it, who is playing the leader in the consensus algorithm, that which could also be separated out. Currently, the leader is following the block producer. Now, that could be changed in the future as well. We could have a completely separate leader. We could keep a leader active until, for whatever reason, they go down. We could have a leader either fall by 1 or be 1 ahead in the schedule, or it could fall finalizer. It could be whatever we choose. Like there's no reason to couple the concept of a leader, a validator, and a block producer. Those 3 concepts can be completely separated in the new consensus algorithm. For 5.0, those will all be combined in the block producer.
Yeah, I think the first thing that, like after 5.0, the first thing one might be interested in doing is, like you said, is separating the leader, because that would have like an instant effect on when somebody is down, you no longer have to wait that time.
Yeah, I agree. Like currently the way it's in with the producer, I think is less than ideal because of the exact scenario you just talked about, that, you know, if a block producer is down, if you had a leader, you could actually switch. The other kind of really cool thing about the new algorithm is, like, we could, now again, none of this in 5.0, but we're building it and getting us where we can go there and, you know, in the future, is that if a block producer is down for a round, like you could switch to a different block producer and not miss a complete round. So that could be a part of the new consensus once we have it in place. There's no reason to wait a full 6 seconds of no block. We could say, hey, this block producer is down. Let's switch to a backup, or any series of backups. Like it doesn't even have to be a single backup. It could be many like people could then like buy for that ability to be the one that produces the block. And there's no problem with that scenario.
Or you could register your BP and your backup BP both, and then maybe the consensus algorithm would know to.
Yep. Exactly that.
The other one.
Yep, exactly that. So that's all stuff not in 5.0 because, steps here. We got to get the consensus algorithm out the door, which we're working on doing. But it opens up all kinds of really cool possibilities in the future where we can go to even a more robust system than we have today.
And those would all be things that we could be changed with MSIGs, I presume. We need to get the block producers. Which is the role that I guess determines now we have 3 different roles. Which of the roles is responsible for approving these types of changes in the new consensus?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It would be the block producers still for any sort of multi-sig sort of thing, because they're the ones that's actually producing the blocks. I guess somewhat finalizers, because obviously they're the ones that ultimately are going to, approve of the blocks. But presumably that role will just continue to be as long as the block meets consensus parameters. It's going to be validated. Hopefully we don't get into a situation where validators are like, arbitrarily not validating blocks because of, they didn't like the list of transactions or something like along those lines.
So in a scenario in the future where we have these roles separated as producers and finalizers, then on the next consensus upgrade comes, and let's say we got 21 producers and 100 validators, it's the producers still that would have to sign an MSIG to activate the new consensus features, but the validators would have to execute that transaction. But would they even be involved in the MSIG? And maybe we're getting too ahead of ourselves. But
I mean, ultimately a validator validates a block, right? And so if currently today that's simply consume a block, and if it meets consensus, then it's considered validated, right? So there's not any logic there to like be, what would be the term, to have an opinion about that.
Right.
So yeah, so it would be the BP's whose job it would be to
cool.
To define that.
Now going back to 5.0, this won't be the case. The only thing that we need to be aware of is, okay, now we have a new key and we have to manage that key probably differently than what we're doing today. Do the BPs on this call have a good grasp based on what the conversation we had here? What is the impact to how we operate? How disruptive is this change to the way that we operate? And, how much care are we going to have to Matthew's point that, this is something that we're going to have to communicate to all the top 21 BPs, whom some are more or less engaged and in tune with the intricacies of the technology. How disruptive will this be for those and us? And what do we need to do to close the gap there?
Yeah, I can tell you it impacts us the same way it impacts Michael. Right? Because currently the way we manage keys on block production is we just move the key between nodes.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, definitely don't have a good grasp on it, but in all fairness, because there's not a lot of documentation out and really all the details, wouldn't, expect to have a good grasp to really be able to. But I understand and I'm excited about the new features and architecture. But yeah, I mean, once we can start seeing, what is it like? Is it really just simply, I need to manage 2 keys and yes, I moved this key to this server and this key now, and I comment them out? It may be a little impactful, but it may not be detrimental. Or is it not even possible to do it that way? And now, we've got to figure out whatever. So the more technical details, maybe in RC, and here's what you're expected to set. How does that fit in? I assume it'll be, for most people, adding a few configs to their 5.0 BP with this new key that they're going to have to learn how to generate. So.
Yeah, but also when you switch from primary to backup, you have to generate a new key.
Is that actually the case, or can we move a key one toward the other? That's what I say. Without knowing for sure, but I don't know how disruptive it'll be, but it's probably going to be disruptive. A, you've got a new thing to manage, and B, it sounds like it's not the same logic.
I think the answer to the question there, Dan, is that we actually just need some more detail on how this works. And then we can tell you. But I mean, does the key how do we manage the keys? Let's just get solid information in front of us, and we can tell you how disruptive it's going to be.
Right.
If at all.
Yeah, and Michael asked a question earlier about, is there a specific permission for this key? Because, that tells us.
Or could it use some type of, mechanism like that? Correct. Yeah. I don't know if it requires or just piggyback on, because that also was that right now it's all the BPs. And yeah, I mean, we could, you're signing key or something like that. But if you start getting 100 different validators, are they all just, because that's one thing that I know a lot of our BPs that are, living and dying in this, the first thing they do with their block signing key is go and add it to their account as some random key, because you would think it needs to be associated to an account, but no, it's just registered off in La La Land, right? So I was curious if it fell back into the natural structure of permission or could. Anyway,
I think it's an important question because it goes to the security of that and how things get managed, right? Because the person who controls the block producer is not necessarily the person who runs the nodes. And so the permission of the doing this node transfer needs to be different than the person who has the key to run the block producer.
I will say, yes, we have dedicated keys with only the unreg permission that our minions that are out there have access to be able to at least unreg, maybe not even re-reg, but, but I mean, that's not, it still uses the permission structure. It's just what action you're calling. But yeah, I mean, I'd assume there's going to be some sort of action to register a new validator key that could be utilized. Anyway, yes, let's see how it goes. Let's see what you come up with. I'm happy to, if there's a magic under the hood draft that I need to keep my mouth shut about, happy to look at it and give you some feedback and whatever, if that would help.
I was going to raise it. So Eric, I think you mentioned that there is an open issue to document this stuff. I'm not sure if you can speak to when we might expect at least an early draft of that document. I think we got a great audience here who can help make sure, give feedback on, have all the questions we have been answered in this documentation, and do we understand it clearly enough that we're confident in being able to share this with, again, the rest of the top 21 and any other node operator.
Yeah, I don't have a date. I have to go back and talk with Brian and some other folks about priorities because we're all busy right now. So we just got to make sure we got the priorities right, and then we can come up with dates.
Well, I guess my feedback is, if you want feedback on how pause, resume, and other things work, then you need to do this first to get the feedback on how this works. So that informs how the other features are.